we're gonna have on guest Eva Chipiuk, for real this time, come on to talk about the emergency act inquiry she is setting on right now. And yeah, so Eva Chipiuk, Eva, how are you doing today?
Pretty good, thanks. I don't have any hockey analogies for you today, so hopefully you got your fix of them today.
Definitely, yeah.
You know, Brendan once told us, if we do an interview, he's going to talk about hockey. I think he loves hockey more than representing Tamara Leash and the other people in the inquiry. In any regard, we have Eva Chipiuk on.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop you. I don't think that's true, but we can keep going now.
That's right. You're right. It's far from being true. All right, we have you on. So what were your general impressions from today?
Well, you know, we started with the Coutts mayor this morning, and just to put it into perspective, Coutts is a border town in Alberta, 250 people population, so incredibly tiny village, actually, I should say. And you could see the mayor breaking down a little bit today, talking about what he went through. There was a lot going on. The town was divided, as we heard, and you could see the hurt and the harm that he experienced. And at the end, it was either Brendan Miller's questions or the commissioner, I can't recall now, just asking, I think it was Brendan's asking, what is your impression of your town's impression of the federal government? And he said, we think Justin Trudeau hates us. And, you know, you just got, like, your heart sinks when you hear something like this. You got good Canadians, hardworking Canadians, feeling like the federal government is just not there for them. And that is really what we experienced here in Ottawa. That's really the reason that people stood up and started protesting. And he said he had nothing against peaceful, lawful protests, which I think we all believe that that's the correct way to protest. Everything just kind of became more difficult after 2 years of harsh realities and after not being heard for so long. And you know, even the commissioner asked, did they move to a legal protest after, when they were told to leave? And they did. And they continued to protest for 2 or 3 weeks later.
Yeah.
So nobody was intending to be protesting illegally. I think it was, again, mismanagement and late to the game police responses, as we saw obviously in Ottawa.
Yeah.
And it's just heartbreaking. And
just to make it clear, the protests in Coutts had nothing to do in terms of the organizational teams with the protests in Ottawa, correct?
Yes. And again, I think I called you on this before. To use the word organized for even what happened in Ottawa, I have a very hard time using it because nothing was organized about anything that was happening. It was incredibly grassroots. It was incredibly fast moving. Things were just happening as they were going. There was an issue, you dealt with it. There was no long-term strategy planning or logistical planning. So 100% there was no connection with anybody that was in Ottawa.
No, that's important to remember. I think sometimes people associate all the freedom protests that took place in Ottawa to the freedom convoy that took place. All the protests that are more freedom oriented across the country to the protests that took place in Ottawa, the freedom convoy.
Yeah, as you know, just an organic movement, as a movement that they felt compelled to replicate in their own town. They couldn't make it to Ottawa, possibly. They were close to Coutts or Windsor or whatever, and it sparked across the world. I think it was 26 or something convoys around the world. So, nothing at all organized about it, but it was just the need to be heard, and that was a venue, a way of making themselves heard.
Yeah, I think the only resemblance, the only thing that is absolutely the same thing is the purpose of the people being there, the purpose which was to fight federal COVID-19 mandates. All right, Brendan Miller just came on recently, so let's take a look at clip number 5 when we see Brendan Miller cross-examining the mayor of Coutts, Alberta, Mayor Willett. Let's take a look at that.
Interactions you have with your residents with respect to their support or lack of support for the federal government as it currently is composed?
Well, I'll quote my CAO, Trudeau hates us. And that's basically, you could talk to anybody there. there's a great dislike for the federal government on a
Okay.
high percentage.
And what is these dislikes? What are they about? What are these people's grievances in your residence and in that area?
Smarter minds than me have tried to figure it out. I really don't understand the great dislike for the federal government.
So this was the cross-examination by Brendan Miller of Mayor Willett. He doesn't understand the great dislike that the protesters had for the federal government. How can you not understand?
Well, I think it's always a little bit, it's not always what you see at face value that determines what a person says. As we've seen, there's lots of contrasting views and testimonies that have come out. And again, I think that in his closing statement, when he said that he did support them, I think he absolutely meant it. And I mean, if personally speaking, if I was the mayor of some place and I did or didn't understand certain pressures that I was under, would I be very willing to, you know, maybe say that the government isn't so great after all? Especially when it's so outspoken. I think the only politician right now that is being that outspoken actually is Danielle Smith with her apology to all the people that face prosecution during the COVID restrictions and mandates. So I agree that it's a little bit, it's hard to hear that. And then it's hard to hear when he says that he does indeed support the protesters. But again, I think that there's so much more that goes on behind doors that we're not aware of.
Well, one thing that I noticed a disconnect on this is that, and again, it was with Brendan Miller's cross-examination in a RCMP document that he put to the mayor. It said that the RCMP was there to engage with people, protesters. And then he asked him if he experienced that, if he saw it. And the answer was no.
Yeah.
And what did the mayor do? That was the next question again from Brendan Miller. Did you go out and talk to these people? Did you go out and talk to the protesters? And the answer was yes.
Yeah.
So the disconnect, I think, is talking to constituents.
Yeah.
I think I talked about this early on when I was on the show, is that MPs and our elected officials have really forgotten what their purpose is and that they're meant to speak to people. And I, again, love that William goes out and talks to the MPs and asks them questions and
But they
puts
don't
them
respond.
on I know. And to me, it's incredibly wrong. You should start reading to them their roles and responsibilities.
That's an idea.
What they are what their role is as an MP is to talk to constituents, no matter, and it says right there, no matter what your views are.
Well, you know what's interesting is that recently in the House of Commons, you know, the Liberals try to put pressure, try to take aim at Pierre Poilievre for not answering media questions. They said that that's the most unbelievably idiotic thing I've ever heard because of the irony behind it. They said that since Pierre Poilievre didn't take any mainstream media question, he should pay back his salary.
I mean,
to his constituents, they haven't been answering a question for 7 years.
Well, and I did hear a little bit about that exchange today. And what I did hear Pierre Poilievre say is that I think we're a bit too obsessed, is the word he used, with what's going on in Ottawa. And I 100% agree with him. And again, this is the disconnect. Nobody is talking to people outside of Ottawa.
Yeah.
It's very insular here. You could feel it when you're here. It's a bubble in Ottawa. And you could hear the frustration of this poor mayor of a small, tiny town village in Alberta that just feels that nobody's listening. His constituents feel that they're not being heard. And what we saw from the federal government in their questions to the protesters, you kept hearing them ask, you don't control these people. Did you control? It was about control. The question constantly surrounded control, rather than what they were doing is they were listening. They were there to hear what protesters came to Ottawa for. And again, that's a huge disconnect. I find elected officials, I'm not even sure what they're doing if they're not talking to constituents.
Really, though. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Like, what else? It just, you need to be able to have that perspective from the people that you're supposed not in control, in charge of. You're there to provide them with services. You're there to take care of them. And now we have this constant history where we can look by recent history, really, where we see that it's the total opposite. And again, they're not even answering questions.
No, they're not
The
answering
conservative
questions.
MPs and MLAs will answer our questions, but it's specifically more so the Liberals and some of the NDPs.
Yeah, well, so far the experience that I received, even NDP MPs answer my question. I know, Alistair McGregor, one of my first interviews that I did with an NDP MP, Alistair
Okay,
McGregor
perfect.
spoke to me for 2.5 minutes about why he thinks it's okay to ban guns in Canada, like the NDP wants it to do. And we fundamentally disagree. I'm ready to bet on nearly everything, but he still took the time to speak to me. I thought his questions were wrong, but I thought he actually took the time to answer my question, which I think were great. And even the Liberals who we elected to power aren't able to do that. No, I fully agree with what you said. So just to go, yeah.
Well, I was just going to give you a little update of what happened because I think you guys were already in session here live. Brendan Miller had a chance to cross-examine this assistant deputy for the province for the Minister of Transportation. And so what Brendan Miller took or cross-examined him on was a federal act, and just now slips my mind, but basically it was an act that was available to the federal government for where the bridge was, and any blockades on the bridge. All they had to do was enact it. You could fine people, and so he just put it to them. Was this act available? Of course, this is the provincial Minister of Transportation, but it's just another tool that the federal government had in their toolbox.
Yes.
And either they didn't know about it, which is possible. There are a lot of acts, but when you've got a blockade on a bridge that you're suggesting is causing massive economic damage, you might want to look through the acts and see whether or not something's available to you before you go and enact something that's meant to be used in only extreme circumstances.
Well, I think it's something similar to what you're talking about. That might be what you are talking about is when Ian Freeman from the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario, the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario, spoke to the fact that warning letters could have been sent to the protesters prior to the provincial emergency being declared. And he testified under oath that the police never told them to do so. That's clip number 9. If we could take a look at exactly what Ian Freeman, once again from the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario, had to say to that. Sure. So basically, yeah, is that the one that you're talking about, or is it a different?
No, this is a different act.
Okay.
So it was, I'm going to pull it up now. So we actually have it, and it was a federal act called the International Bridges and Tunnels Act. So right in there, there's fines, there's enforcement clauses available to the federal government to use where they see that there is an issue on a bridge.
Yeah, official opinion is that if that's your job to look after like those bridges, that jurisdiction, to make sure that you're utilizing every single act, measure that you can take before the Emergencies Act, and you haven't done that, that's a huge form of incompetency that I can't even go into depth to tell you is unacceptable, to be at that level and to still just be in that ignorance.
Yeah, of course. Let's take a look at what exactly Freeman said in regards to the letters.
See later that later that there were warning letters issued after the provincial state of emergency was declared of potential CVOR consequences under that law. Could that have been done prior to the invocation of the provincial emergency, to send warning letters about known potential violations?
I think technically anything is you could send a warning letter to do something like that. We were never asked by police to do it, and it was a police-led response. So I would clarify that first. But I would also say I think we would be of the opinion that, sending warning letters for something that we know we wouldn't deploy wouldn't be the right thing to do.
So you're saying that they had the option of sending warning letters, and they also had the option of invoking the act that you're talking about. So they had two options before invoking the provincial emergency and hence the federal emergency.
Yeah, so just to clarify, that was an Ontario response and this was a federal act that was available. So he did on the stand say, I'm not as familiar, but that sounds reasonable. But, again, I'm going back to what I was talking about with elected officials. Same thing with the police. There seems to be a disconnect about with police. The discussion, like last week, we heard a lot about it, that none of the protesters here in Ottawa were actually directed or ordered to leave the city. There was constant dialogue every day about what, how can we minimize it and where people should park, but not once. And then there was some kind of piece of paper thrown around the city, and they assumed, I think, people would understand what that meant. But like he said, you could put in a warning letter, but why can't people have a dialogue? What's happened to having a discussion with people? Like the police can come talk to these people and say, look, you're causing a problem. And again, going back to Coutts, when they were told they have to leave this area because it's, I guess illegal and it's blocking things. I'm not familiar with that protest. They gave them a plot of land that they could protest legally. They had a dialogue.
Exactly.
And then they resolved it.
And, I think how you do one thing is how you do all things. So there's not one instance that I can speak on where I've witnessed conflict between any one person or thing where the only way to resolve it wasn't to open up a stream of dialogue. I mean, to ignore somebody's being the people that are in outcry, trying to communicate a message over the heartbreak, the loss, and all of the things that they went through over the past 2 years, and you ignore them, that pressure starts to build, and it builds and it builds until the top just pops off. And that's exactly what we saw. People were fed up. No one is listening. No one is willing to actually start that dialogue, to open up that stream of dialogue that is going to be very important for not just, the different provinces to heal based on what was going on, but Canada as a whole. And that's not even speaking towards the rest of the world that also experienced that similar outcry.
Yeah, I think that one of the people that says it best is Keith Wilson. Every time he comes on, he talks about the Canadian way, quote unquote, the Canadian way to deal with a protest, the Canadian way to deal with a situation, the way to deal with a disagreement is not to go ahead and invoke the nuclear option, not to go ahead and invoke a never seen before anti-terrorism law on peaceful protesters who are protesting the COVID-19 mandates. It's to have a dialogue, and none of the levels of government were willing to have that. And we're seeing that again right now.
Yeah. Well, not only Keith Wilson said it, but the CSIS document said it. I think that came up on Monday. They said, don't do this. It's going to cause more extremist views. It's going to cause more violence because people believe the system is broken, and that's why they're here.
You're confirming their views. Mayday, mayday. Whatever will we do for telling them exactly what they needed not to do, and then still having it done.
And I think that's a great segue. Thank you, Eva, to my next point, CSIS. Next week, we will be hearing CSIS testify at the Emergencies Act inquiry. What is important with CSIS testifying?
Are they going to come? No, I'm just kidding. Spicy. So just to let you know too, there's been a little bit of dialogue online about that there was a decision made by the commissioner.
The blackout.
Yeah. Are you familiar with it?
We spoke about it in a past live stream, but I think it would be a good idea if you could touch on it again, just for our viewers who are joining us now. So
what the commissioner did in that case is the federal government said that it needed to keep things hidden from the public because of national security. And what the commissioner decided is he's going to review them initially on his own with the federal government and anyone that has security clearance. He's going to review whether or not, in his view, that information could be made public, whether he could summarize the information or all of it and needs to remain hidden. But, we've seen a lot of information so far. You see redacted parts of documents, but I think that we have quite a bit of information already. It's going to get quite interesting, quite spicy next week, I think. With CSIS, we have also the RCMP coming in. So
Brenda Lucky will be testifying next week, right?
At some point. I don't know if it's next week, but she
on the list.
Yeah. So just for everyone at home right now, a super quick game for you. Write in the chat what you think CSIS. What does CSIS mean? What is the abbreviation? What are the letters? What do the letters mean? Write in the chat, because I think a lot of people get it wrong. But What is CSIS, Eva? I know I have a video coming out soon on Rebel News about what is CSIS, that you can all understand what we can expect for next week's testimony. What exactly is CSIS? But what is CSIS?
Well, I'm no CSIS expert, but from my understanding of what is it is, it's the Canadian Intelligence Agency.
Yeah.
Not that acronym, obviously. So we've heard from OPP and their intelligence, and that's only on a provincial level.
Intelligence.
No, OPP, I give them a lot of credit. They
Yeah.
did excellent. OPP Superintendent Pat Morris, the top intelligence agent,
Yeah.
excellent testimony and
Yeah.
really professional organization.
Mhm.
We'll see how CSIS delivers when they come in, but it's basically on a national scale.
Yeah.
The difference as well is they don't have enforcement arms, so they just carry on the intelligence and gather information, but they don't do enforcement. So once they gather information, intelligence, then they have to coordinate with the RCMP, for example, OPP, or any local police authorities.
Yeah, and just for everyone who actually did the game and thought about it, CSIS means the Canadian Security Intelligence Services. But that's what the acronym means. I think that CSIS, where we saw some evidence come out in the past weeks that were very revealing and very relevant to whether or not the Emergencies Act had to be invoked. And I guess that we can expect more of that next week when they actually testify.
I expect so.
Yeah. Well, I hope we're going to be able to see that. All right, just to end it off with our favorite prime minister ever, Justin Trudeau. Let's take a look at clip, one of the two clips that I sent earlier. What Justin Trudeau had to say last week, sorry.
Doug Ford said that if you want to do something about the preemptive use of the notwithstanding clause, you need to sit down with the premiers and talk about reopening the Constitution. Even though Ford has decided to repeal his use of it to deal with the Union of Public Employees, would you be open to doing that to get ready for the next time?
Canadians are facing challenges around the rising cost of living. People are worried about climate change. People want to know that there are going to be good jobs for them now and into the future. People want to know that we're preparing for possible future pandemics. These are the things that are top of mind for Canadians, not reopening the Constitution. Our focus is on being there to support Canadians now.
Absolute lunacy.
So, Celine, well, we heard that's how he speaks. He speaks every second. Yeah, this former blackface prime minister. I don't know if you heard his comment. I'm not sure if it was you that was here in the live stream when we talked about it, but the federal solution to dealing with inflation is to tell families to get rid of their Disney Plus subscription.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say to get vaccinated. That's how it started. I've heard that so many times.
Well,
it's a solution for everything these days.
Yeah, it is getting vaccinated. But he talks about other pandemic.
Yeah.
And he says that we need to get ready to deal with other pandemics. I'm wondering how many lockdowns, how many 2 weeks we're gonna have during other pandemics.
I don't know what was done correctly by all levels of government. So I have little faith that they're prepared for another pandemic situation.
But not only pandemic, climate change, guys. Climate change is a huge issue that Justin Trudeau spoke to.
Like everyone watching this, right? Like you heard that, what do you think about the climate change, alleged climate change pandemic? Drop it in the comments right now, because I'm curious, and William will for sure read your comments 100%, but I have no faith that if anything like that ever happens, that it will be any better than what we saw in the past 2 years. In fact, I would put money down that it would be a lot worse. And that's scary. That's just my opinion, but that's what I believe personally from what I was able to garner from my own experiences.
Yeah, of course. So My apologies, guys, for making you go through another Justin Trudeau video at the end of this live stream.
You should apologize.
Thank you so much for coming on. Eva, where can people find you on Twitter? I heard that you're now famous on Twitter. You're famous on TikTok.
Really?
So where can we find you on Twitter?
Incredibly unprofessionally. I started a handle before I thought I'd ever use this, but it's forever. Eva, maybe 79.
And what's the reason why it's forever?
Well, my name is Eva. Forever, Eva.
The best lawyer ever.
Yeah, so if there's ever any
Thank
doubt on how you pronounce Eva Chipiuk's name, just say forever, Eva, and you'll be able to say it right. All right. Thanks so much, guys, for tuning in. Oh, there's one thing that we forgot to mention. A lawyer collapsed earlier during the inquiry. You were in the room. Can you tell us what happened?
He collapsed. It looked like he fainted.
Yeah.
There was a nurse in the room, and she went and attended on him. And she said that he seemed okay by the time the EMS came. He looked alert when he left, and that's as much as I know. It was pretty shocking, obviously, for everyone.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope he's doing great. I think he was conscious when he left the building. So
Yeah, it looked like it.
Yeah.
everything should be fine. And the witness that appeared in front of him, who underwent examination because it was a commissioned lawyer, will he be testifying tomorrow then?
I believe so. Yeah, it looks like he's back tomorrow.
All right, perfect. So if you want to see his testimony, we'll be able to see it tomorrow. All right. For real this time, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. If you want to follow all of our coverage from the National Capital for the next few weeks at the Emergencies Act Inquiry, you can head on to truckercommission.com. Did we have any chats today? Okay, perfect. Okay, so that's the actual goodbye. So thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Thank you for co-hosting with me, Celine, and thank you for joining us. Eva, thank you to the coach, the Freedom Convoy organizer, Coach Miller, for joining us shortly today. And I hope that everyone has a great evening.